I'm Stephanie Wilson, and you're listening to Freedom Over Fascism.
There is no just free and fair and balanced media in the world. And so what I think is much more important is transparency. Transparency about what you stand for, why you stand for that. The personal experiences of our reporters are part of how and why they report the news. And then people can make their own judgments about whether they want to trust that or not.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to Freedom Over Fascism. Today, we're going to be talking about media, which we've talked about before, and we'll talk about again. This episode features my conversation with Tara McGowan, who's the co-founder and publisher of Courier Newsroom, which is a collection of 10 local news outlets in battleground and power-building states. They focus on social media and the ways that people actually consume information. The reason we talk about media so often is that the legacy corporate media is failing. They're failing to tell the public the stakes of this election. They're failing to call out fascism, and they're failing to help uphold democracy, in which a free and fair press is critical. So we're investigating what it will take to get our message to voters and surge voters in order to win the election. Last week, Dan Pfeiffer noted in his newsletter that politics is information warfare. And I think that this is really on point. Not only do we need good messaging with the right focus, which means that voters are the heroes of the story, focusing on the future and focusing our freedoms, we also need people to actually hear what we're saying. This season, our guests have all been saying this in one way or another. Mark Riddle told us the most successful candidates are the ones who actually succeed in breaking through the sea of crap that MAGA and corporate media spew and reach voters and potential voters. Stephanie Shriak says our biggest problem is distribution, which is more or less what Mark Riddle said. We are not reaching our potential voters because no matter how many doors we knock on, people will turn on cable news and they'll look at all the major newspapers and they will see the normalization of fascism. They will see the media talking about the odds of who's going to win and poll after poll after poll. They will also see journalists and analysts equating MAGA and the Democrats when clearly MAGA wants to take away all of our freedoms and Democrats want to protect them. We need wealthy progressives to buy media outlets from local radio and TV, print outlets, to bigger nationwide outlets. And we need a new way of distributing information. As we think about facts and values-based news, there are a couple of things we need to keep in mind. Voters care most about their future, and most Democrats, let alone most Americans, have no idea what Trump has done, and more importantly, what he and the right-wing machine have promised to do if he or other Republicans take office. Many voters in power-building states like Indiana, Ohio, Iowa, Texas see Republicans using political violence and rigged supermajorities to take away our freedoms every day. And they're also trying to do it on the national level. This includes militarizing our National Guard in order to turn them against Americans on the streets, banning contraception, banning political gatherings, and much, much more, which we'll talk about as we continue to talk about Project 2025. And as the fascist Republicans normalize violence and throw so much crap at us, we can't help but hop from one issue to the next. You know, I read a lot of newsletters, and Jeff Tiedrich, who writes the newsletter, Everyone is Entitled to My Own Opinion, which I highly recommend, says it very succinctly, that now the campaign is heating up, the unrelenting fire hose of bat-shittery is happening all over again. Quote, vermin poisoning the blood is pushed out of the news by Trump's $500 million judgment, which is pushed out of the news by Trump accusing Biden of starting World War II, which is pushed out of the news by some cockamamie ruling by Trump fangirl judge Eileen Cannon, which is pushed out of the news by Trump promising a bloodbath, which is pushed out of the news by Trump catching a break on his $500 million judgment, which is pushed out of the news by Trump posting violent videos which is pushed out of the news by Trump attacking a judge's daughter, which is pushed out of the news by Trump posting a meme of Joe Biden hogtied in the back of a pickup truck. As we discuss, often people believe what someone they trust says. So it is up to us to educate people that we know in real life about what Trump is going to do to them. Now, if you're a billionaire and you're listening, please help underwrite this podcast, Freedom Over Fascism. That's Freedom Over Fascism. But also, please invest in buying media outlets themselves to build power and get the message out to those who wouldn't hear otherwise. Now, here's my conversation with the fantastic Tara McGowan, who walked the walk and created a media network that is getting results. Tara McGowan, welcome to Freedom Over Fascism.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm happy to be here.
I am so glad to talk to you today in particular, because there's been a lot going on with media and freedom and independence. And as we sit here right now, I kind of feel like we're sleepwalking into fascism. And we know that one of the most important things to democracy is a free and independent press. But right now, the media landscape is stuffed with the right wing crap from Fox, and Sinclair has bought up so many stations. And the legacy media don't seem to understand what the stakes of the moment are, particularly as we sit here on March 26th. NBC has just hired Ronna McDaniel and is getting a lot of blowback for it. So by the time people listen, that might be in the past, but it's definitely part of the landscape. How does what you do in Courier Newsroom fit into this picture?
Yeah, it is. It's a bleak picture. It's a bleak moment. I often say that I think that the media in America is in an existential crisis for a number of different reasons. And I started my career in journalism and I took a detour into politics after covering politics for a while and then found my way back to media because I really felt in my time, both in traditional legacy media. I used to work for CBS News a long time ago, and then working in democratic politics and progressive politics, that there wasn't evolution in media was not happening at the pace at which evolution in technology and our politics and just generational change is happening here and around the world. And, with starting with something as simple but very made very complicated, which is how we consume information. That has changed dramatically. And I really felt that media was not keeping up. And because of the market forces brought on by big technology companies entering the scene like Google and Facebook/Meta, suddenly the existing business model that news in America relied on to exist and sustain itself was broken. And so a very, very reductive way of explaining what that has meant for journalism in America has meant that only the largest corporations and companies have survived and weathered those shifts. And the way that they have done it has been to really prioritize content and both sidesism that will drive clicks and engagement and attention, and without any perspective on what they're reporting on and how they're reporting on it is damaging the public's understanding both of the truth and of what's happening in politics and government and how it impacts their lives. And when you get down to the local level, it's so much worse because local news has been absolutely decimated in America. Hedge funds have bought up a lot of legacy local news publishers to break them up into pieces and sell them. Others have just totally shuttered their doors, massive layoffs across the country. And where there are efforts to keep local journalism and media around, they're just trying to survive. And the way that they've found an ability to survive in the short term is paywalls, which is
Mhm.
literally trapping that good local journalism and preserving it only for paying consumers, which a lot of research has now proven out is just the most highly educated and wealthy Americans across the country. So we have this information chasm in America that just keeps widening. And, there's not a lot of self criticism in media because they are culpable. And I think, in the best defense of them, they feel their hands are tied. They have to
Mhm.
money to be able to stay in business, and they have not figured out a path to do that without kind of, leaning into the disinformation economy or the, salacious attention economy that exists now online. So I started Courier in 2019 to try to create a different model, really a different and modern model of advocacy journalism, right? So, the very, very roots of journalism and media in America were ideological. They were very explicitly values and issues driven or ideologically driven. Folks tend to forget that now in the elite towers of legacy media today. But I just felt like this moment really called for that. It calls for new models. It calls for disruptive models. It calls for bold models. And, some of the former standards of objective and traditional journalism, they're no longer doing their job, right? And the job of
Right.
media and the job of a free press in America is to inform the public and to protect and preserve our democracy, our democratic
Mhm.
government and system and society. And our media is not up to that task for all the forces I just mentioned. And so Career is a very different model. We describe it as pro democracy, which is a little bit turned into a bit of a catchphrase. But what that really just means is that protecting and preserving democracy is the North Star for us. And that means that we will never compromise truth or facts. Of course, we have to find ways to make those more engaging and
Mhm.
accessible and relevant for audiences. Dry facts will not win out attention over salacious conspiracies or Kate Gate or anything Trump says. And so it's really, really important that we figure out ways to actually connect with people who don't pay attention to politics and news. And that's another stat that's really alarming.
Right.
I think it's conservative, but the latest Gallup poll on this showed that 37% of Americans do not trust media any longer. And that is up from, I think, 23% less than 10 years ago. And it's just, trust in information and in media is really important. And the media has not done a good job of protecting or preserving that. And so, what I often say about Courier is that we don't believe in objectivity. I think that was
Mhm.
all an illusion, right?
Mhm.
Every newsroom in America makes editorial decisions about what to cover with their limited capacity and reporters, how to cover it, how often to cover it. These are all editorial choices that are made. There is no just free and fair and balanced media in the world. And so, what I think is much more important is transparency. Transparency about what you stand for, why you stand for that. The personal experiences of our reporters are part of how and why they report the news. And then people can make their own judgments about whether they want to trust that or not. And the reason there's so much mistrust, I think, is because no one ever believed the objectivity lens. They
Right.
always knew it was bullshit, right? And so it's better to just say, look, we actually do believe in LGBTQ plus rights and we do believe in abortion access and or we don't, whatever. But as long as you're very honest and upfront about that and let people make a decision, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to contribute to people only hearing the same things that they already believe. That is a factor, but it's just a matter of being authentic and honest. And that's something that we would really, really, really feel is important at Courier. So we have values, we have positions on big political issues and issues that impact Americans, but we're very transparent about them. And we will only ever work with the facts and the factual positions and statements of elected officials and candidates running to represent Americans.
I think that that is so important. What's your business model so that you can support yourself? I know it's really hard, and some of the best news I get is from individual Substacks, and that is not a sustainable model. Nobody can pay for every newsletter, and you can't support yourself doing it. Me with the, single digit paid subscribers. So, how do you support Courier, and how do you recommend, or what do you think ought to be more of the steps going forward to stop a lot of the both sides crap that's going on right now?
Yeah. So I think a lot about this. I consume every single article and Neiman Labs newsletter that is reporting on the media industry and the struggles and, trying to look like needle in a haystack for people that are coming up with different ideas and models. And where I've really landed and how my team and I built Career from the very beginning was with an understanding that any distributor, any publisher of good factual news and information at the local or national level in America has to be subsidized in some part by philanthropy. It has to be for now and probably for a very, very, very long time to come. There is not a business model or a silver bullet strategy or tactic that is going to both achieve scalability,
Mm.
sustainability, and an ability to ensure that you don't lean into disinformation or salacious content in order to be able to make revenue. And so I think that any news organization, independent and niche and hyperlocal, all the way up to national or even global, has to have a diversified revenue model. You have to have a number of different streams to bring in money. None of them are going to be the dominant one for long periods of time. You can't put all your eggs in any one basket anymore the
Mhm.
way that you could with traditional advertising. And you have to go where people are. And increasingly, that's on social media platforms that are incredibly difficult to monetize, which is one of the barriers, right, for good local and independent publishers not being able to evolve to meet people where they are on TikTok or Instagram Reels, because
Mhm.
that's a cost they have to incur. And then they don't know how to make that money back yet because you
Right.
can't make money on those platforms. So there are real, like, I'm very, very sympathetic to like the forces and the challenges in this ecosystem. And so the way that we designed Courier was to start very, very, very heavily reliant on nonprofit, mission aligned organizations as underwriting partners and individuals who wanted to be able to invest in new models or experiment, or who care deeply about democracy and the audience that we care about at Courier. So that's something that's different about Courier too. We are left leaning, we are pro democracy, we're called progressive, but the fact of the matter is, like, we have people who really understand that what we're doing and what we are advocating for with our honest journalism is necessary and urgent right now in this moment. And so we create a space for them. So mission aligned individuals and organizations, and even corporations, if there are some. We've only ever had one corporate advertising partner, and that's Patagonia. We hope to have more, but we do, have a high bar for mission alignment. We will never
Right.
take money from big oil or gas. We'll never take money from Meta, right? Companies that, Axios, Politico, New York Times will gladly take their advertising and sponsored content revenue from. And underwriting partners never get to influence the journalism. So they are not
Right.
sponsored content. They are not advertisers. They are giving us money in good faith because they share alignment on our mission and values and the agreement of the problem. And so they will give us money to be able to expand our coverage of things like abortion bans being proposed and passed in state legislatures where we have newsrooms, or resources to be able to hire more reporters to cover the debates over public school funding and voucher programs and things of that nature. So we're very explicit about that because we can be, because we're honest about our values and where we stand. And so that creates a space for organizations that advocate on behalf of these causes and issues and audiences and communities, frankly, to be able to help us do more of the work that we do that can hopefully help move the needle and keep more people informed in an information environment that is just absolutely saturated with disinformation and propaganda.
You have to be really dedicated to getting good news in order to get good news.
That's right. That's right.
So I had a conversation with Stephanie Shriak a couple of episodes ago, and her pitch was basically yours, but from a kind of a larger perspective, which is donors go buy media. Go be like Sinclair, buy local radio stations, buy media. That's a really good place for your money because we, as defenders of freedom and democracy, are ceding ground, and our problem is distributing our message as much as connecting with voters. Because if you don't reach them, you can't connect, right? And if you don't connect, they won't talk to their friends. And so what I advocate a lot on here, because I'm a little podcast that talks to activists, is to go out and talk to your friends. But that's not going to solve the problem either. I mean, you've gone to philanthropists. Has that been I I'm not gonna say it's easy. Fundraising's never easy, but we found a lot of people in the last year fundraising has been especially hard. So, I just threw a lot at you.
The first one I want to start on is that it is both and. Everything that you tell your listeners is absolutely right because everybody does have a role to play. one of the things about the decentralization of media and information and the silos that we all go into and where we're all getting information, and we all have different curated feeds and algorithms and preferences for who we trust and what influencers we follow and what, our news diet is if we have one, which most Americans don't have a proactive one. So it all matters. And the more people are willing to share good information, they don't need to be a TikTok influencer. They don't need to go on camera themselves if they're not comfortable, but sharing factual journalism like our Courier Newsrooms, if you live in any of our 10 states, the battleground states, sharing that stuff on your Instagram stories and retweeting it and posting it on your Facebook page, that all matters. And news is actually very neutralizing. It's something that we found. Part of the reason I started a news organization is that local news is still the most trusted news source, even for younger Americans. And yet there is a vacuum. So
Mhm.
I didn't want to let that thread go by, because that is actually really important. And you just never know the impact that you reposting a factual headline or story has on someone you'll never know. And it really, really, so it's both and. And yes, on the other side of the spectrum, if the good guys and girls, the good billionaires are not buying up media in America, the bad ones are. And we know that they are because they have had a head start on this, both at
Mhm.
building and buying their own media. And
Having a strategy.
yes, absolutely. And they're doing it in a really, really, really nefarious way, right? Like they are,
Mhm.
so Sinclair you mentioned is a perfect example. A very pro MAGA, pro Trump media company and owner who has bought up over 95 local trusted television stations across this country, and ruthlessly, unapologetically has the same syndicated propaganda news segments that go across all of those Sinclair stations and are not at all explicitly disclosed about why they are talking about that, how it is cookie cutter across them.
Mm.
And these are on stations that, older generations have been watching for decades and decades and have no idea that when
Mhm.
ownership changed, editorial guidelines and standards changed. And so
Right.
that's really malicious, right? That's the opposite of transparent. And that is really, 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 really scary. And so, and then, you have the ones where there are firewalls, but like you look at the Washington Post. The Washington Post would not exist today if Jeff Bezos had not bailed it out, right?
Mhm.
The founder of Amazon. So sure, he claims he doesn't put his thumb on, the scale of their editorial journalism or independence. And I believe that. I take that at face value. And yet, if Jeff Bezos can't figure out a way for good journalism to make money with a brand, a legacy brand as known and trusted and acclaimed as Washington Post, we know that we're in a real crisis when it comes to the business models of media, right? And so again, there's this other element that I think is really interesting, which is billionaires are bailing out legacy media when it gets to the point of they literally will shut down, like the Washington
Mhm.
Post. They aren't bailed out. I took an approach where I brought billionaires in from day one
Mhm.
and was transparent. George Soros is on my cap table. George Soros is an investor in my company. And, I got a lot of folks that came to me and were like, this is a death knell, like you'll never be successful or scale. And I was like, I used to work in Democratic politics. People are going to say that I'm a Soros puppet anyway. I would rather get the resources of one of literally the most prolific and effective pro democracy philanthropists in the world, in history, who really, really, really cares about a free press and cares about preserving and protecting democracy here and abroad. And also I'm clear-eyed about the fact that like I would rather have them in the beginning and knowing they don't want to touch the editorial strategy at all than have to go ask them to bail us out when we inevitably fail because we could not figure out a economic model based on advertising or sponsorships that could actually enable us to scale. And that's a huge reason why we went from 6 newsrooms in 2019 and 2020 to now 10, and we're
Mhm.
opening our 11th in Texas this year. And so I really think that we have to broaden our aperture about how we fund journalism, who we trust, the guidelines and the guideposts that we put between the philanthropists and the investors and the editorial side of this, and that there is a way to do this and be transparent, and also to ensure that there are no levers being pulled outside of accountable, trusted, factual journalism.
Do you feel like you, in your 10 newsrooms and their reach? Do you feel like you're breaking through the lega legacy media or legacy plus social media drumbeat of disinformation?
I do. We are really pretty surgical. We're very data driven at Courier. So, I spent about a dozen years running political voter communications programs online, targeted digital advertising and organizing programs to educate, inform, and essentially mobilize different segments of the population to vote and to vote in line with their values. And so when you work in political campaigns and elections, you have scarce resources. You have
Mhm,
limited time and limited money, and you have to
mhm,
be as effective and efficient with both of those as possible. And so you end up being pushed to really figure out who are the most important audiences that need what messaging at what
mhm,
frequency. So you use your money and your time as efficiently as possible to get the votes that you need out. And so I never learned that in journalism about how to be effective about informing audiences. I didn't go to business school, certainly. But it's just invaluable education that I received because in this decentralized media environment, you really do have to pay your way through echo chambers and algorithms.
mhm,
And I learned how to do that really effectively. And it's not nefarious because any advertiser is doing it, right? It's
mhm,
and we're not listening to you. Whereas, like, you might say something about how you want to take a trip to Tahiti at some point, and suddenly you're getting all of these sponsored ads about Tahiti on Instagram and TikTok.
mhm,
How is that happening? There's literally people listening to you. We don't do that. So it's really just about us understanding who are the folks that aren't already really engaged or informed and how do we get them the information they need when they're just getting a lot of crap in their
mhm,
news feeds and they're not paying for journalism. And then we measure it because that's the other thing that I learned in politics. Because in order to raise money, you have to be able to prove your impact. You have to have
right,
receipts. Another thing that I never needed when I was in journalism, your success is kind of measured by the respect of your peers and really old legacy awards, right? So I learned about randomized control trial and treatment experiments, the same thing that medical trials use. And so we run experiments. We actually take out a segment of our target audience from our newsletters and from our boosted news, our advertising programs that literally just put the journalism in front of people
mhm,
on Meta and search platforms. And we withhold a representative sample of those audiences and we survey them and we survey the people that get our journalism and our newsletters before and after a period of time. And you see
mhm,
the difference in their information and their opinions about specific issues and also their turnout in elections because there's voter files in America. So we can actually see who of the people that got our newsletters and read them and who of the group we kept out of the newsletters voted and if there's a difference. And we have proven time and time again that our journalism, targeted through boosted news and through our free email newsletters, has moved the needle in a really profound way at educating and mobilizing audiences that don't vote regularly. And so that is really why Courier has been able to be growing as quickly as we are and have the resources and the underwriting partners that we have because we've been able to really demonstrate that breaking through algorithms on social
mhm,
media platforms, local factual journalism, native to those platforms, right? Like if you look up
mhm,
the Gander or Copper Courier on TikTok, you're going to see that our reporters are social media influencers. Their faces are the ones breaking down their news stories in really conversational ways. And that's how people consume information today. So we know that we can break through. We know that we can make a difference in terms of civic participation. And, regardless of folks in the local and national media landscape who are critical of the fact that we have a point of view, I really think they should be copying us in terms of our distribution strategy, that they should be actually making native reporting to these platforms and getting it to the audiences who actually need to be reached with more factual information.
So, do you train your reporters in the things that they need to include or the ways that they ought to portray their stories? Or do you find people who already excel at what you're looking for? And probably that's a both and, but I'm curious as to how do you make sure you have good content that's
Yeah.
going out?
So there's a number of different layers, right, to what makes good content. And I'm hearing a few different threads in your question. So the first is actually like how you format reporting, whatever you're reporting on, right? If you're a print reporter, which most of our journalists started as print reporters, whether
Hmm.
digital or actual paper print, we had to train them and also them kind of train themselves because there's not a lot of precedent for this to how to translate and no longer write long articles, but take
Hmm.
their good reporting, their sourced reporting and interviews and, investigative reporting and diligence and translate that instead of a long article that no one's going to read, or certainly our audience isn't going to read, into vertical video, short form content, into Instagram carousels that explain things in simple ways, into headlines that get the most important information across when people are scrolling. And so there's training on that. And then the other thread I sort of picked up on is on the editorial side, what our reporters cover and how they cover it. And that is so I'm the publisher, so I don't have a role in that, but I have two national editors. I have a national political editor, Pat Reinart, who's incredible. He was the founding publisher and owner of Iowa Starting Line, which we acquired back in
Hmm.
2021, a really reputable progressive newsroom in Iowa. So we elevated him a while back to national political editor. So he manages and coaches and works with all of the political reporters in our 10 states. And so he's the one that really sort of sets the coverage strategy at the high level. But really, the political reporters in the states, they know what matters to their audiences,
Hmm.
right? Like it was over 2 years ago that Cam, who's our political reporter in Arizona at Harper Courier, was like, I really, really, really want to focus on housing affordability. It's an issue we hear
Hmm.
about all the time on the ground here. It's really, really important. And we were like, okay, like let's see. Pat was like, focus on it. But if it doesn't get a lot of engagement or what have you, there's other priorities and things that need to be covered. And now housing affordability is not only the biggest issue in Arizona, it's the biggest issue in a lot of states in this country right now.
Right.
And that's something that a lot of national news organizations miss until it hits national levels. And so that's something that I built something I wanted also,
Yeah.
which is always the sign of a kind of a good idea is if you really see an opportunity. I wasn't finding really good local political reporting or journalism for all the years that I was doing political work in battleground states. And so I'm just always blown away by our reporters and how they work together collectively. And again, to my earlier point, you have to make hard choices. You can't cover everything. Our teams are small. We have five, and yet they're big. Local media that we have five full-time reporters and editors in each of our states. And
Wow.
and that, is larger than some legacy local news publishers, but it's still small and they're still inundated, right? Because there's so many stories that go untold. And so it's really important that they do stay focused on the ones that we think matter most, right? Like what
Hmm.
are the rights and freedoms that are being actively threatened or taken away within our states? That's going to have to take precedence over other reporting areas. And so Pat really sets the tone. And then our
Right.
other national editor, Kim Lawson, she's been with Courier almost from the very, very beginning. She's our national community editor. So she manages all of the community editors who run the newsletters, the weekly free email newsletters across our states. And that's really focused on just local news and non-political, restaurants and travel and sports and the content and information that people really want that they're not getting on social media in their
Right.
communities.
So you're in 10 battleground states, yet we know there are a lot of states that are power building states. And we know that that takes a long time and a lot of investment and a lot of sustained effort. Do you have thoughts or a plan to go into some of those power building states where you need to be contesting every race? They have to be getting through the disinformation. Somebody needs to like break into national media if a story is going to take off at all. What's your strategy eventually for power building states, or are you going to stick with battleground states?
No, it's an excellent question. It's one I think about all the time. I mean, if it were up to me, this won't surprise you. We would be everywhere. We would be in all 50 states and territories and district. And we just don't have the resources to do that. And so actually after 2020, we made a rule that we couldn't actually go into another state or market if we didn't have upfront underwriting partnerships and investments for a minimum of 2 years of the annual operating costs of a newsroom. And that's really important because we needed to have buy-in and
Mhm.
sustainability. I never ever want to be in the business of opening a newsroom that has to shutter its doors. We are here and we are here to be permanent infrastructure in our states and to continue to evolve and migrate where audiences go because they will continue to migrate where they get their news and information. And so that has actually led to our ability to expand. We opened newsrooms in Nevada and New Hampshire in 2023. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be opening in Texas. So Texas is, I would say, a power building state. Texas is a deeply red state, and it's a deeply red state because it is a non voting state. The vast majority of the population in Texas does not vote. And that is how extreme right wing candidates in the Republican Party have maintained a stronghold there. And so we're also in Iowa, I mentioned. Iowa is unfortunately another, as you describe it, power building state. The Republican legislature there and the governor have been passing incredibly extremist legislation coming after trans kids and right school vouchers. I mentioned to decimate public schools and communities across the state, abortion bans, you name it. Same thing in North Carolina. Cardinal and Pioneer Newsroom there has been actively covering the really, really heinous things that the Republican state legislature has been passing there, including an abortion ban. And so I feel often that we can have the largest, greatest, and fastest impact in these states, and not just within the states themselves, but there is a dire, urgent need to be exporting the stories of
Hmm.
Americans who are being impacted by these egregious laws and policies to the rest of the country, because these are the petri dishes of the Republican Party of what they want to pass and what Trump will explicitly pass or just frankly mandate if he is elected in November. And I think that there is Trump amnesia in this country. And I think that there is a sense that if you lived in a coastal state or a blue state or a Democratic led state, you don't necessarily understand how egregious and how serious they are about things like a federal abortion ban and immigration internment camps and absolutely vilifying and inspiring violence against LGBTQ plus communities. So this is really important. So if we could be everywhere we would be, I think it's really important that there is alternative media and good factual reporting in these states, and there isn't. And it makes me truly anxious to think about it. And it's just a matter of how do we have the resources to be able to get into these places. And, generally, all of our rights are moving to the state, this extreme Supreme Court that Trump was able to rig with the help of Leonard Leo. And so increasingly, it really, really matters that everyone knows and pays close attention and participates in their local elections about who is going to be making those decisions in their state houses, because this is what the right wants, is for all of those decisions to get moved to the state level.
Or all of them to get moved to the national level if there's a dictator in charge.
Exactly. But for now, they've kind of put that in place anyway through the court system.
Right. I live in one of those coastal states, Massachusetts, but I did a lot of work in Indiana, and you see just the difference in everything, from internalized voter suppression to healthcare outcomes to people whose trans kid can't transition. You really see the difference, and I think sometimes that people who are in those states don't even understand how it could be different if they had good governance, inclusive governance. And so I think that we need to be exporting those stories and also the stories of what it's like when you have good laws,
Absolutely.
right? You
Yeah.
know,
And like when you
uh,
have a raise the ceiling state, like what we've seen in Michigan, right? The transformation, and like Michigan is still scary to me in the presidential election, but with a Democratic trifecta for the first time in 40 years in that state, it's been unbelievable to watch out of our newsroom, the Gander's reporting just how much they have been able to get done and increase and secure the protection of human rights and the rights of different communities while they've had power. That's equally important. I couldn't agree more.
right.
Like
And how long did it take them to do that?
40 years to get the trifecta. Exactly. And it's fragile, right? It's always
Hmm.
fragile. Elections every 2 years. So it is so important that folks don't take for granted any of the rights and freedoms we have, because the threats are so much more severe and well backed and resourced and strategic on the other side than I'd certainly seen in my lifetime.
I don't know about you, but I go through phases where I'm hopeful because I'm taking action, and I am absolutely desolate and discouraged And so then the people who are not really paying close attention are in some other state where they can't pay attention because they, have to live their lives. And what is your strategy for, I guess, helping the people who are already invested stay invested, both monetarily and actively, and then to reach people who are so closed off because either they feel like they can't listen or they're really trying just to put a roof over their heads and food on the table?
So this is I think one of the most important questions for us to grapple with this cycle, because everybody is understandably tired. There is enormous fatigue, there is depression, there is anxiety, right? Things don't feel great in general, even though certain things are getting better. And this
Mhm.
administration has passed unbelievable, unprecedented legislation to address the climate crisis, to put money back in people's pockets, to end the pandemic ultimately. And it's almost easy for us to forget that, like, we didn't have a path out or see a path out 4 years ago when we
Mhm.
were all in lockdown. And now, more or less, our lives are back to normal for most people. And yet we will see another pandemic in our lifetime, right? So
Mhm.
we also know government really matters, and yet we are all tired. This is my third presidential election where Donald Trump is the biggest threat to our democracy and that we're running against. So I want to just like lift that up. Like, yes, you are right to feel this way. Things are not that great. We are fighting against enormous, really, really scary forces. And it's hard sometimes to feel and see what we're all fighting for. And we've got to get to the other side of this election to really start to build that vision together of the
Mm.
world that we want and that is more equitable and representative and democratic. And we just can't get there if we lose it all in this. And so there is a little bit of resignation to that. That is hard. I will say, though, where I find my source, like you mentioned this too, one is obviously I've committed my professional and pretty much my personal life to this work because I don't know what else I would do because I can't sit still with that kind of anxiety.
That's
Um,
exactly what I
you have
yes.
you don't have to make it your full career or life like I have. Please have healthier boundaries than me, but doing stuff does feel better. Getting involved in whatever way works for you, leaning into your strengths, right? Like if you are an extrovert and you love to meet people and talk to people, sign up for volunteer shifts, to make phone calls, to knock on doors, to get out into communities and talk to people. If that is not your jam, find ways to write postcards. Those are really effective. There's a lot of organizations that do that work or contribute other things, dollars to candidates up and down the ballot, et cetera. Get involved and you will feel a little bit better. The other thing that I want to say that I have found as a source is that I feel enormously privileged to be alive in this moment where we actually have the opportunity to fight for everything we believe in this way and to win. We can't forget that we, as in people who care about democracy and care about human rights and care about our rights and freedoms on our bodies and the decisions we make around our lives, we have been winning since 2016. We have
Right.
been winning against these extremists. We have been winning to protect abortion rights in states as red as Kansas and Ohio by huge margins. Like there are more of us. And if we are engaged and we are doing the work and we are showing up and we are voting, we will keep winning. And what an unbelievable gift to be part of a movement like the civil rights movement back in the 60s. Like, this is an incredible thing to be a part of and to also build lifelong relationships and community and moments and experiences and memories throughout. That is arguably the most meaningful thing that you can do. I really do feel very lucky and privileged to be in this moment and to be in this fight. And I feel very confident that we will win.
Well, I am really glad to hear that. I closed up a recent interview with somebody who was telling all of our listeners about Christian nationalism and New Apostolic Reformation and demons and stuff, and I said, "Well, that's inspiring." But what you said is actually inspiring and is a really good counterpoint to hearing about things you didn't know about that make you even more scared. So I love how you're taking action and your model too, because a lot of us need to figure out like I do this for free and that's not really sustainable. right? And I hope I can sustain it, but we'll need investment. And that's hard to ask for. That's hard to get. And kudos to you for being able to get that investment to get this project off the ground.
And thank you for the work that you're doing and doing it for free, to your point that isn't sustainable. And I hope you get the resources to keep doing it because you are doing your part. And that's every single person doing what they can bring and contribute is so important. And these conversations are really, really important, both to talk about how serious this moment is and the stakes are, but also that like there is light in this. And,
Mhm.
this is why we are proud to be Americans. Those of us who are, is because like this country was built on freedom and freedom of religion and freedom of the press and a democracy that is very imperfect but worth saving and very worth fighting for and working on. And so I know that any of your listeners, if they're listening at all, it's because that they also share that belief and do the work. So I'm really grateful to you and to all of you listening, and hope that we can keep growing your audience and making these conversations reach more folks.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for listening to Freedom Over Fascism. And thank you to our editor, Benji Wilson. Please join our Patreon at patreon.com/freedomoverfascism. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please drop us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you for choosing freedom over fascism.